What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks for Sports Illustrated on Fan Nation. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the episode, to the podcast, I should say. If you guys are watching live on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, greatly appreciate you guys stopping by and taking some time out of your day to talk some Ducks with us. Definitely go ahead and leave some comments in the live chat. We want to talk about recruiting in this episode. We also want to talk about some hoops to start things off because that's kind of the freshest news. So go ahead and hop in those comments and let us know what's on your mind when it comes to recruiting. And Steven and I will do our best to answer it. And if you're watching on replay, definitely do the same thing there. Go ahead, let us know how you're feeling. Tons to talk about with the Ducks right now and recruiting. With all that being said, I am joined by my good friend, Stephen Blanchette. He is one of our writers at Ducks Digest, and he always hops on these podcasts with me. Got to see you at the game last night, man. How we doing, Stephen?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It was great seeing you at the game last night. How are you, Max?
I'm awesome, man. Couldn't ask for more. You know, I got a little run in to end my day. Really cold in Eugene lately.
Freezing.
But, you know, in a weird way, I've kind of missed how cold it's been since I've been out of town out in California for a while. So, I mean, I don't love how it's freezing, but like it's a nice little switch up. And, you know, it's a reminder that you're in the Pacific Northwest, which is a great spot.
Certainly, man. I've been struggling with that. I'm from California myself, as you know, and you could take the boy out of California, but you can't take the California out of the boy. I am struggling here.
Yeah, it's pretty chilly, but you know, we get through it, right? We got some nice days every now and then. So we are going to talk about recruiting, but like I said at the top here, we do want to talk a little bit about hoops because here at Ducks Dish, we talk about, you know, all things Oregon. We don't limit ourselves to football. And the Ducks got you know, it was a tough loss last night. You know, start off talking about the men dropping a home game at Matthew Knight Arena in Eugene. 82-78. That's the final score for this last game. And it was really, you know, a back and forth kind of game, Stephen. You know, the Ducks started hot. Devion Harmon and Will Richardson were putting that thing up from behind the arc, and the offense looked like it was getting off to a hot start. And then things kind of just slowed down. And Dana Altman spoke with us after the game about, you know, how they really weren't moving the ball very well, and they were kind of getting outworked. So it's just a tough loss for the Ducks. And, you know, this upcoming game on Saturday against Oregon State becomes that much more critical. Kind of wanted to ask some of your thoughts on the game.
Yeah, it was really a tale of two halves kind of game. I mean, Oregon was coming in really hot, 6 wins in a row, had just knocked off, as you know, USC and UCLA down in Los Angeles about a week ago. So the Ducks were riding high. To start the game. I mean, I showed up to the arena a little late, Max. And so when I got there, the Ducks were up 12, looking great. So I was thinking, all right, this is kind of already put to bed here with about 15 minutes left in the first half. So I certainly spoke too soon. Altman hit it on the head. I mean, there were so many possessions there, especially in the second half, where they were one pass or zero pass possessions, right? So the person who brought the ball up either passed it off once and took a shot, or they took a shot. And so the offense seemed stagnant, and Colorado capitalized. They were running. They also caused a ton of turnovers in the second half. Like I said, really a tale of two halves. It also felt to me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but you know, I feel like especially with hoops, you've got a lead, and it sort of seems like you maintain that lead for the, you know, generally most of the game, but it never feels safe at all. And after I got there, 12 didn't seem so safe. And then it sort of just felt like that the entire game until Colorado really flipped it. The Ducks made a push there at the end. Some confusing, decisions there at the end by some of the guys on the floor, you know, just based on the situation in terms of trying to make a comeback and tie the game. But it was interesting. It was a weird vibe, just kind of trying to hold them off all game, and then having Colorado make that final push. And then the Ducks just too little too late.
Yeah, that was definitely a lot of back and forth, you know, with how the game transpired and how things kind of unraveled at the end. I think you can really point to Oregon's, you know, presence in the paint. I know that was something that was kind of lacking. You know, they finished, I believe it was -8 in the rebounding category.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, just overall sloppy play. You know, I was asking Dana Altman some questions about the game, and, you know, he was saying that usually he hit on a myriad of factors and stats. He was saying you score 78 at home and you shouldn't lose, right? That should be enough is kind of what he was getting at. But overall, Ducks drop a tough game, and I think that it's tough to see the time that this comes at, because you talked about those historic wins over USC and UCLA, and the whole tradition, it kind of seems like with this Oregon basketball team, is that they're ready to go when it comes time, for the tourney. But now we don't even know if that's going to be, a lock at this point with the way things have kind of gone.
Yep. You want to get hot closer to March. That's always the goal. And with the Ducks sort of slow start that they had this year, I mean, certainly I would say they underachieved a little bit to start the season. The success they've had in the past week, 2 weeks has made me feel like, okay, Altman's got them on the right path here, and they are peaking at the right time. And then you have a letdown game like this. So I think you nailed it. It makes the Oregon State game all that more important Saturday. I'm really excited to be at that game and see how the Ducks respond, right? That's the only thing they can do is respond positively and try to get the momentum back. Basketball, there's a lot of games in the season that heading into March. And so they do have an opportunity, obviously, to kind of right the ship. But it was definitely, you could see it at the guys too. They were disappointed. They played their hearts out, and they didn't want the game to go like that, obviously. And it sucks when you give up a lead like that. But it's really interesting with the two half kind of things. I mean, at the first half, it was 42-37 Oregon. Second half, it was 45-36 Colorado, right? So you could literally almost flip it on its head.
All right. Yeah, we're going to have to keep our eye on that Oregon State game. That's the next opportunity for the Ducks to get back in the win column. That game, as you said, Stephen, Saturday, January 29th at 7 p.m. here in Eugene at Matt Knight Arena. Now, before we talk about recruiting, we want to talk about Oregon women's basketball. I was at their game earlier today where they took on Utah and ultimately came away with the win, 70-66. Really a close game, for that whole that whole time. You guys can read my recap story on Ducks Digest. I got some awesome photos from Scott Bolt, our photographer. He's been going crazy with his camera lately. So definitely got to give him a follow and give him a shout out if you guys haven't checked him out. But, the story with this Oregon women's game, the Ducks, they weren't really having a lot of success from 3-point land, Stephen. Finished 5 of 23 for shooting behind the arc. That 3-point ball wasn't really falling. But they had 4 different players in double figures. You got Niara Sabali, India Rogers, Tina Pau, and Sydney Parrish, all finishing with 10 or more points. And I think just with the way that we've seen the team play, a lot of times they're playing through those bigs, right? Niara Sabali and Sedona Prince. But Tina Pau and India Rogers, I really liked what I was seeing from them as far as picking their shots, weaving through the defense, and getting other teammates involved. So, those are some of the notes that I kind of wanted to talk about with that game. I'm not sure how much you were able to catch of it or, read about.
Yeah. I saw some highlights. Overall, good win. I thought it was going to be a bigger margin of victory for the Ducks going in. The women's team has had some really, really high moments this year. The UConn game, obviously one that comes to mind. But you hit the nail on the head. College basketball these days, and the NBA, WNBA, it's a 3-point game. And so when the 3-point ball is not falling for you, you got to rely on something else. And that's exactly what Oregon did. They were gritty, they grinded, and that balanced scoring is really what bails teams out a lot when they are missing something that they usually have, like that 3-point shooting. So if you're not shooting so well from behind the arc, but then you can get, like you mentioned, at least 12, 13 points from 4 or 5 different players, you're going to be in pretty good shape to win the game, albeit a close one. So they grinded it out, and that's all you can ask for.
I think another thing I wanted to mention real quick, Stephen, while we're on this topic, I was kind of just, watching the subs that were coming in and out of the game. A lot of people, when they think about Oregon women's basketball, they think about Sedona Prince. She was coming off the bench today, and I don't think that was a bad thing. Just with some of the rotational players that Oregon has, that since they brought in so many talented transfers, I think it's really become a luxury to bring a player of Sedona Prince's caliber off the bench and kind of insert her, at different moments, which I think has been great. And that's something that not a lot of teams can say. And then you bring in another player like Shania Pinto, who's been playing some tremendous defense of late. They bring her, Kelly Graves brings her in late to try to get some really crucial stops when they needed it most. And I think that, they're really finding a little bit more of their groove, and things don't get any easier with UCLA coming to town on Friday, and I'll be at that game as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Rubik's Cube of basketball, especially when you're talking about transfers and that kind of thing. You're figuring it out all season. It's not like you figure it out going into game one in terms of who's going to be at every, what's the rotation every single game, who's going to come off the bench at what situation in the game. Basketball is one of the more situational, I'd say, sports of anything that we've got out, going. And so that's exactly right. You've got to be able to plug and play at the right times with these players. And like you mentioned, everybody stepped up. Everybody stepped up when they were called upon to do their role, performed it well, and it got them the win. Again, it was a gritty win. I would say it was sort of an ugly win, but a win's a win, and you got to love to see it. So they do have a tough test, UCLA, coming on Friday, but something they can build momentum off of regardless of how close the game was.
Ducks return to action at Matthew Knight Arena Friday against UCLA. That game is at 8 p.m. So a little bit later. Make sure you adjust your schedules accordingly. Steven, now with hoops, kind of talked a little bit about that. Let's talk about what everyone's kind of thinking about. A lot of people are thinking about in the Oregon fan base, the Oregon community. That is Oregon football recruiting. National Signing Day is coming up really, really fast, and Dan Lennon and his staff have been working tirelessly on the recruiting trail. Bouncing kind of back and forth, being here in Eugene last weekend to host some really talented visitors. Some of them I'm sure we're going to talk about in this episode of the podcast. And then right when they leave, the staff hits the road again. That private jet's definitely logging a lot of miles, visiting guys that were just here, even in some cases, really just to show them. Jaden Rashada being an example, he was here over the weekend. I talked to him, and then Dan Lanning and the Oregon staff show up at Pittsburgh High School, on Monday. So I think that it's just such an interesting game to follow, recruiting kind of that game within the game. And then, another big weekend of visitors coming up here. And some of them are 2022 guys that I'm really excited to talk about.
Yeah, it's Christmas season for fans of recruiting, and it's sweating season for coaches. So it is pedal to the metal right now, and I think you hit it on the head. The private jet, the PJ is getting a lot of miles right now. Phil Knight is probably. I wonder what Phil Knight thinks of that gas bill, but I think it's really impressive for those recruits to see the commitment, because with recruiting, they're obviously looking. They're going to be committing to a school, but they're looking for commitment from that school and that staff. And I think that's an awesome example with Rashada, I believe it was, who had Lanning come or visited, and then Lanning shows up. Was it Rashada? I'm sorry, I might have my notes. Yes, it was Rashada visiting on Monday. If that doesn't show clear interest in my mind as a recruit and as a kid, I don't know what does. So I think that Lanning and the staff have been doing everything that they need to do, considering, remember, they were behind the ball really when it comes to recruiting, just with everything that happened with Cristobal. And then Lanning, I think, did a great job of kind of juggling two jobs when he was preparing for the national championship and recruiting, but he still was not able to devote his entire attention to it. So with the short time that they've had in terms of guys who are sort of leaning Oregon, or who we think are going to lean Oregon or have Oregon in their final few schools, as well as people who we've talked about before that he's convinced to stay in the program, or in the coaching staff has convinced to stay in the program, I think they've done a great job. There's also been some transfers that have really hurt deep down in the gut, and we'll talk about that. Travis Dye obviously being one of those here, but it's wild. We're really getting down to the wire here. Final steps, final visits, final pitches, final conversations. So with signing day right around the corner, it's really anyone's guess for a lot of these guys, but at the same time, I'm feeling good about some big names too.
Absolutely. Well, one of those big names that we have to talk about in this episode of the pod has become pretty clear that he is the Ducks' top priority in the 2022 class, and that is 2022 cornerback Jaleel Florence out of Lincoln High School in San Diego. If you guys are watching on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, we got some of the highlights here on the screen to kind of show you, obviously, the player that we're talking about, and then, even more so the talent that the Ducks are looking to hopefully get back in the fold here with Florence. Kind of just a little bit of an update on him right off the top. Earlier this week, announcing that he is working from a Final Two. That is the Oregon Ducks, of course, and then the USC Trojans. It's really interesting that we get this battle, when it's happening, because you have Lincoln Riley coming in at USC and Dan Lanning coming up at Oregon. And that's, become one of the better traditional rivalries within the Pac-12. And we're seeing a recruiting battle set to culminate here with a decision next week, pretty much right away with both these coaching tenures.
Yeah, the battle that I feel like is going to be going on with Lanning and Riley has started already, and it's going to be going for years. And I love everything about it. I think it's going to be some really exciting stuff going forward on the recruiting side in terms of those two guys vying for top talent, especially on the West Coast. Both of them want to make the West Coast their spot, their fertile recruiting ground. So as you guys can see from the highlights, Florence is an elite talent. He's, like Max said, looks like it's just down to USC and Oregon. So I think that, with the announcement, I think the announcement's coming last week. Am I correct in that? Next week. Am I correct in that, Max?
I think he's announcing on January 31st is the last that I was hearing,
okay, so
but it's not for sure by signing day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, he's an immediate impact type of guy, and that's what you're really looking for in terms of, your high level recruits. Like, you want them to be able to step in from day one or as close as that to that as possible. And Florence is one of those guys. He's a 4-star guy. Interesting that he sort of decided to reopen recruitment when Cristobal left, right? Because generally you'd think, okay, if that's happening, then we don't have a shot at the guy, but canceled all his other visits, as you talked about earlier. So with Oregon and USC being the top two, I think Oregon's got a really good shot to land him, and it'd be huge. They need help on at corner. So,
yeah, and with Florence, I do kind of want to lay out the case. With him being that prime 2022 target right now that the Ducks are looking at, I kind of want to lay out the case for why I think that it's ultimately going to be Oregon. In the end here, to start, I think that you look at the factors and the circumstances for Oregon, and you have. He was a former commit, so that's already kind of given the Ducks a leg up, and the staff wasted no time, getting in front of him pretty much right away. Right. I think about the Twitter video that I saw Florence post, and it was, a midnight visit from the Oregon staff, and they were there into the wee hours of the morning, like 2:30 a.m. I think it was. And you saw Coach Demetrius Martin in that video, I believe. He's the new cornerbacks coach, so sending them out to San Diego to get that immediate FaceTime with Florence is huge. And he's a guy who has deep Pac-12 ties. Obviously, some serious ties out there in Southern California. So that's a huge help. And then later on, you saw them do another visit, the Oregon staff with him and Grayson Halton, who at the time was still committed, but has since decommitted. That's another new update today. Ducks losing a pledge along the defensive line. But getting that visit again with Florence is huge. And then they were able to, that visit with Halton that I was talking about. You had 4 Oregon coaches go out just to see those guys. You had Demetrius Martin again, Tosh Lapoy, Dan Lanning, the head coach himself, and Matt Powledge. So why I think that's significant is you have Tosh Lapoy, who's another elite recruiter, ties all up and down the West Coast, particularly in California. And so I think, you just see the Ducks, bringing out the big guns essentially, for lack of a better phrase, with their coaches that they're sending out there. Obviously, when you see Lanning there, it's for real. And then the Ducks also have Jaleel Tucker, who signed during the early signing period. So, they can still pitch that vision of those two guys playing together. And then you have USC, right? This is kind of long, but I think just with the situation that they have, they're coming in late. However you want to look at it, they did make the final 2. But Oregon has been recruiting him for so long, and really has become known for the pipeline that they've established with San Diego and Lincoln High School. I know that the Oregon coaching staff has a lot of great relationships with the guys out there at Lincoln. So that's a tremendous help. And, I think the biggest point I want to make from this, Stephen, is I talked about the battle between Lincoln Riley and Dan Lanning, Oregon and USC for these Southern California guys. It's definitely going to be harder, I believe, for Oregon to recruit in Southern California, let alone any other school not named USC, because Lincoln Riley is an elite level recruiter. But he did just get to USC, and Oregon has been building those relationships and, has been winning, these recent years and, putting out some good defensive backs into the NFL. So kind of things like that are part of the reason why I think that they're in a great spot to land Florence. And then there's also been some reports that he's actually going to make it out to Eugene this weekend for another visit. And I think that ultimately falls in line with the coaching change and recruits getting an extra official visit to, meet the new staff and see their vision.
Yeah. Made a lot of great points there. I think it was really crucial, like you mentioned, that, once Lanning and company kind of took over, that they did not waste a minute in terms of getting back in touch with Florence, making sure that he knew that the University of Oregon was still completely committed to his recruitment and that they wanted him desperately to be a Duck. The recruiting visits down south that you mentioned, I think played a big part into that as well. And, he'd be an elite grab. It would be a win over USC. We always got to keep track of those, chalk those up, and keep a tally of those every time we can. Especially again with the Travis Dye news. I think Ducks are kind of seeing, or Duck fans are pretty anti USC right now, and so it'd be great to get just a quick victory in terms of plucking somebody from their literal backyard and bringing them up to Eugene. But yeah, I think USC is going to have an advantage built in, obviously, every time they've got a Southern California recruit, because that those kids have grown up mainly watching USC football, most likely, and the glitz and the glam of LA, and Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, those golden years, which seem like forever ago now, but it's still something that I think they can market. And so yeah, there is that built-in disadvantage. And don't you want to play at home in front of your friends and your family, which is a big reason why Travis Dye, I think, decided to transfer down there, is because he's a SoCal kid, and it means a lot for him and his new fiance to be down there and spend his final year of college down there in front of his family and his friends. So there's already all of those disadvantages. Okay. But the fact that Oregon still continues to win down there speaks to those relationships. And when it comes down to it, I think the relationships are much more important than the glitz and the glam that come with USC.
One final point that I kind of want to just add here, Stephen, don't want to spend too much time on one guy. But you obviously talk about the position in need at cornerback. Yep. The dude's just an awesome athlete. You see on tape here all the value that he adds in the return game and how he can make plays after these interceptions. But I think with some of these guys, like you were talking about, they grow up in Southern California, watching USC, rooting for USC. USC they haven't had that elite level product consistently in a long time.
Exactly. So, it's been forever.
A lot of these guys that we're talking about that, maybe are in Southern California, they really haven't been able to grow up and see USC in those glory years. Be it as it may, that was maybe a little bit more extended, and they did win national championships, obviously, with the likes of Pete Carroll. Oregon's been winning now. They were right there in contention for the Pac-12 title against Utah this as soon as this season. And what was USC doing? They were looking for a new coach. And, things had just completely fallen apart. So I do think that, how they've been playing recently definitely comes into play here. And I really think that the Ducks are in a great spot to get Florence back in the fold. And what a big win he would be for this staff on signing day. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's move on and talk about our next guy. I do want to acknowledge Andrew's comment that I put up here on the chat. He said, looks like Halton is gone for Boomer. Lord, I hope some of these 50-50 people commit. Florence, maybe most of all, can't stand to lose again to USC. So, yeah, we already talked about that. Let me get our next guy up here on the screen so I can get some highlights. We are going to be talking about 2022 Puyallup offensive lineman Dave Iuli. You guys obviously know how big and important it is for Oregon to be successful in the trenches. I think that's obviously huge. Given the physical kind of identity that the Ducks have really taken on lately, just to kind of get people up to speed, some of the recent moves that he's kind of made. He actually made it out to Miami for a visit with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal. Those were obviously the two biggest recruiters for him when he was committed to Oregon at one point in this recruiting process. So I thought it was really big for him to get out there. With Iuli, I know that he wants to kind of, I think it's important for him rather that he's kind of close to his family from what I've been able to, gather. And I know that USC was right there before he committed to Oregon, and he really liked that visit. So the fact that, he went out to Miami, I think makes them a legit contender. But I think that he, with him coming back to Oregon this weekend. That's kind of the big point I want to get to here. Ducks getting him on campus this weekend is what it's looking like, from what I'm hearing from some sources. I think that's huge to get that last visit ahead of signing day. And, they only signed one offensive lineman in the 2022 class right now in Michael Wooten during the early signing period. You could definitely use the reinforcements there. But I also feel like even if they don't end up getting Iuli, the offensive line's a position that's been such a priority and it's been built up so well of late. It's not the end of the world if you miss on a guy like Iuli, but would for sure be a huge add.
Yeah, with Cristobal leaving, the first thing that I was worried about were the offensive line recruits. That's what I thought was going to go first, because Cristobal is an offensive lineman and he's with the big guys in practice. That was a well-known thing, that he would be hanging out with those guys during practice most of the time. And so, with Cristobal's departure, it didn't shock me that he, took that trip to Miami. And it sounds, from what I've read, it sounds like the trip to Miami was a pretty, resounding success for Cristobal. However, yeah, the last visit is huge. And, when you're just, recency bias is a natural human thing, right? So where was I last, could be what, maybe that could be the deciding factor. Like you mentioned earlier, home seems to be pretty important to this kid in terms of having those ties and not being too far away from them. So let's hope that's a kicker for him. But I think it would be a big ad for the Ducks when you've got the entire offensive line recruiting returning this upcoming season, which is huge. But I think that's a really good opportunity for these offensive line recruits and underclassmen to, really learn and develop. And so I think for the future, not necessarily for 2022 in terms of his impact if the Ducks do land him, but I think he's somebody pretty important to think about when we're talking about the overall future here in the next 3-4 seasons.
Man, I can't help but get excited when I watch this film here that we're looking at, Steven. Seeing him toss guys around like it's absolutely nothing. It's just, you want to see a guy like that, on your team if you're an Oregon fan. But what I was going to say with Iuli, the other point I wanted to say, the Ducks don't have the whole line coming back. They did lose George Moore, but with the depth that they have coming back, that means that Iuli isn't a guy that they need to play right away. He's obviously a pretty big dude. And I think that, he could benefit from getting into that, college strength and conditioning program. But obviously you can see how well he moves for a guy his size. And I'm sure that's what, Adrian Clem and the likes of the rest of the staff are really, liking so far, when you see him. So great for them to get him back on campus this weekend. Kind of, I think they can show him again, this is why you fell in love with Oregon. I'm sure they can pick up some of those points that the previous staff, hit on when they were hosting him on a visit here in Eugene. And I think this is another guy that the Ducks have to be in great position to get back in the fold. But, you look at Lincoln Riley and his staff, they're just cleaning house right now on the recruiting trail, albeit in the transfer portal. So I feel like those are kind of two separate things because you have prep and college people, or college players. But at the same time, end of the day, if you get a guy from the portal, that's still a recruiting win, right? So it's definitely there's no share of competition. There's no shortage rather of competition. You got Lincoln Riley at USC, and what did we learn when Cristobal was here, Steven? Nobody is off the table for a guy like that. And then with how awesome Mirabal was at recruiting offensive linemen, I'd say this one's far from a done deal.
Definitely far from a done deal. I wouldn't be super confident if I was going to be crystal balling him, or in terms of Oregon. But yeah, geez, this tape. The amount of times that he's pulling and just the quickness that he has as a pulling. A lot of these highlights, it looks like he's pulling as a center. So think about that. He's snapping the ball and pulling. You never see that. So that's incredible. When he's at guard, he's pulling really well. And like you mentioned earlier, he's just laying kids out. And so this is a kid where the strength and development, I think, would be huge for him, being, in that program for a year, but he's already got that natural quickness. So right there, geez, I think it'd be a big get for the Ducks. And I do hope that they land him.
All right. Trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to add about Iuli. I think, getting into the state of Washington in this class would definitely be a plus for Lanning. He's that was one of the states that he went to, stop by on the recruiting trail. We talked about, the Oregon staff tapping in with some of these local schools and programs. He went by, FSP, Forward Sports Performance, one of the top 7-on-7 training groups, in the Pacific Northwest. So I think you can see that the staff is making those efforts to build those relationships and connections with those elite level talent, talent factories, if you want to call them that, here closer to home. Because as much as Lanny wants to recruit nationally, I'm sure he does, you definitely don't want to be, short-sighted and miss out on those guys that are here closer to Eugene on the West Coast and capable of, contributing for you early.
100%. I mean, you want to be able to legitimately be able to go to any kid's house anywhere in the country and have a legitimate chance of landing them and being able to be confident about that with your staff. However, it would be incredibly short-sighted to not look for talent in your backyard. There's just so many different factors that play into that being a quote unquote easier recruitment process for a coach. So it's like we mentioned earlier at USC, kids watching USC and becoming fans of that down in LA. Well, with Oregon's consistency over the past, 10 seasons or so, you've got to think that pretty much any kid who grows up in Oregon is going to be really high on considering the Ducks when they're trying to figure out where they want to play. So you've got to be able to, it's one of the key balances in recruiting is being able to dominate your backyard literally, and then being able to expand that backyard to extend to essentially whatever coast you're on. And then the goal is to then make the nation your side yard, I guess, right? Something that you can go to anytime.
Absolutely. All right, that'll do it for Iuli. Want to get to our next guy and someone that is being asked about in the chat. So let me get this set up here. We're going to talk about 2022 wide receiver, tight end, Arless Boardingham. That question coming from Andrew. Any news of 2022 wide receivers that could be a late add? Boardingham sounds more like a tight end. Yeah, so I mean, I've talked to Boardingham a couple times throughout the recruiting process. He announced, like Florence, a final 2. However, this time there's a huge disparity between the two as far as distance goes. Yeah. Announcing a final 2 of Oregon and Florida. He was in Florida for his official visit, not this last weekend, but the weekend before that. So that's the visit that is the freshest in his mind right now, if you will. And then when I talked to him, he told me that the Florida staff came by his school last week. So you figure, they probably got some good FaceTime with him to, show him that he's a priority and, just show him that love. And I know that his family obviously went on the visit with him. And he told me that, Florida's vision and his vision really aligned. He was looking for a place that he's going to be able to, compete for playing time. He doesn't want to just be a guy that's there and that has to wait. And I think you see that with a lot of recruits. No one really commits to a school thinking that they're going to have to wait, but that is the case, with some of these guys. I think that this really does look like a 50-50 battle right now, a true 50-50 battle. One of them that's more up in the air, but I think you can see the obvious upside when you have a guy who's 6'4", 6'5", and 220 around there. He also runs track in the spring. So he just does a lot of different things. There's even highlights like we have on the screen right now. There's highlights of him doing some stuff for Birmingham. That's his high school out in Van Nuys, California, out of the Wildcat. So I think he's definitely a really intriguing option. If you're Oregon, you feel pretty good about your tight end depth, I think, right now. If you're looking at, I know that Kenny Dillingham's plan for him is to kind of use him as a flex, like a wide receiver tight end hybrid type of deal. But you got Terrence Ferguson, who had a great freshman year, Malika Matavao, who had a great freshman year. Both of those guys were instant contributors pretty much right away. And then you have Spencer Webb in that room. I believe Cam McCormick's coming back too. So not necessarily a position of need if you're looking at the tight ends in particular, but with all the attrition that we saw at the wide receiver room, I think could definitely be a smart add for Oregon to add another pass catcher and offensive weapon like Boardingham.
I agree completely. I think that in terms of overall need, the tight end room is probably a little bit more set than the wide receiver room is right now. However, the kid's like already 6'4", 220. So, he's just going to grow and get bigger in terms of weight while he's on a college strength and conditioning program. So I think that lends it to, he'll eventually be mostly playing tight end. But yeah, he's a freak athlete, plays both sides of the ball. In high school, played out of the Wildcat a little bit, slot, plays out wide. So he number 20 overall player in the class, I think I saw. Huge disparity in terms of difference with distance in the two schools he's considering. It's obviously Florida and Eugene, but I do think it's interesting that this is another example of a fresh coaching staff that is in a fight with Oregon. It seems like that's, it's just been happening a lot lately. It will with USC, obviously that's a given, but I just think that's an interesting aspect to it as well. With him being out from California, you hope that maybe staying out west is something that is important to him. And, with Oregon being his last visit, again, I think that is just advantageous in itself. But we'll see. I mean, Florida, has got a pretty good history of pass catchers, both at the wide receiver position and at the tight end position. Most recently, we're thinking Kyle Pitts, right? And I think that plays a lot into recruits' minds, is they're seeing who's getting drafted and they want to step into those shoes. They know that there's a program built for success around that position. And they see basically, if I just go in and perform, the system's kind of already there. And so I think that plays a lot into it as well. So hopefully, that won't be the deciding factor, and he chooses the Ducks because this is a guy who's extremely raw and just like super, super athletic, runs track, like you mentioned. And he's just, as you can tell from these highlights, he's running all over the field. He's just a beast. So he's somebody where if you could get him in here and have Lanning and company kind of go at him in the lab for a year or two and then figure out where he's going to be in terms of tight end or receiver, I think the potential's sky high with this kid.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, Boardingham is expected to be on campus this weekend for an official visit with the Ducks. I think, they make a great point, Stephen, about, what programs can sell, can pitch to their recruits. And, Florida definitely has Oregon beat, whether it be in that department as far as prospects and NFL talent that they've had at that position. You think about, the Florida guys and Kyle Pitts, obviously. So I think I don't want to, touch too much on your point, but I do think that's a great point that, is probably going to be in play here. I do think that if the Ducks, do a solid job on the visit, they're definitely going to position themselves well to maybe land a commitment from Boardingham, especially with the presence that they've had in Southern California. And for all we know, they might have seen him and he just didn't post about it or we didn't hear about it, on social media. So there's a lot of things to consider here, but I think that the Ducks are in a great spot once again. And this would definitely be a good add, but I wouldn't be surprised at the same time, as I kind of want to talk about a little bit later here, if the Ducks didn't, make a massive splash on signing day. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but you just think if you're Dan Lanning, you have to be really careful managing this first class because you don't want to take too many and then, shorten or lower rather the number of guys that you can have in the 23 class, which is ultimately going to be the first, true sample of Dan Lanning recruiting at Oregon, because those are going to be all of his guys.
I agree. He does have to manage it. It's going to be really interesting how he does with it because like on its surface, when you're recruiting, you want to be able to have just overall the top list of guys that you can, regardless of position. You want to just have as many stars as you can, bundled up together. But there are only 11 sides or 11 spots of playing time on either side of the ball for every snap. And so Oregon's already got, as we all know, a massively talented team already with potential wise. And I'm talking about just with its being such a youthful team. I believe 3/4 of the team last season were underclassmen. So you've got to be able to, with every recruiting class, you've got to be able to sort of predict, okay, where may the future transfers come from, right? So that's part of managing that all together. And it'll be interesting to see like where the dominoes fall. But I do agree. I think there is going to be one big splash. I think there is going to be something on signing day where somebody picks Oregon that's, maybe was crystal balled for somebody else or is just maybe just totally out of right field. But either way, I do think they'll make at least one splash.
All right, there you go. And that's a good point to end it on with Boardingham. Want to talk about another guy here. So give me just a second. He got asked in the comments, so I want to make sure we hit on him. Andrew Paul. I talked about him yesterday. If you guys watched my video on on the running back situation at Oregon and kind of the picture heading into next year. With Travis Dye committing to USC and then Verdell declaring for the NFL draft, certainly, shaking up a lot of stuff, looking into next year and then here on the recruiting trail. This question coming from Scott Dolphin. Thanks for asking the question and thanks for tuning into the show, Scott. I really appreciate you. Scott, do we know if Andrew Paul is going to make a visit to Oregon this weekend? This is a guy that Oregon certainly wants to get on campus this weekend. I've been talking to a couple sources, about Andrew Paul. And, we're still waiting to see if he is ultimately going to make it out to Oregon right now. We do know that some of his official visits that he's taken so far in the recruiting process, you have Colorado that got an official visit back in December before the early signing period. And then Michigan recently got a visit. And then as recently as last weekend, Andrew Paul was out at Clemson. So, Dabo Swinney knows a thing or two about recruiting top end talent. And then after he got back from that visit, Andrew Paul announced that he had received an offer from Georgia. So, he's just a guy who everyone's kind of hopping in on here that, is still looking for a running back. And he's super, super talented, playing out of Parish Episcopal in the Dallas area. I really like the way that he runs. So I can't confirm that he's going to be here in Eugene, but at the same time, I wouldn't at all be surprised if he ends up taking his trip out to Eugene. I think he has 2 official visits left, but with 1 weekend remaining, you figure it's probably only going to be one more trip that he takes, at least before that signing day window in February. But I think with him, really up there on the big board for the Ducks. I think one other note that I wanted to mention, since we're talking about running backs, the Ducks did host Jordan James out of Oakland High School in the Tennessee area. He was on campus for a visit. I'm trying to get in contact with him to kind of see where things are at, but it's kind of just interesting when you look at the Ducks hosting a 2022 Georgia commit for a visit, and then Andrew Paul, who the Ducks are red hot after, gets an offer from Georgia, as we get closer to signing day here. So it kind of just makes you think, what's kind of at play here, and where would the Ducks like to go here if they can get whoever they want, with not whoever they want, but in an ideal world, who do the Ducks want to add on the recruiting trail and then in the transfer portal as well at the running back spot?
Yeah, and running back's going to be just really interesting to see how it all plays out with regards to the prep guys who either commit or don't commit, or the transfer portal and what's going to happen with that. Just because with the upheaval, I guess you could say, with the running back room here in Eugene in the past week and a half, that's, I think, the most interesting positional, story here. So, Paul's a beast, man. Like 31 touchdowns, I believe, this past year, super overlooked for everything that I've seen. Didn't really come onto the trail really hot early on in his high school career. I couldn't agree more with your point about liking the way that he runs. I mean, when you watch how he attacks the hole, it looks like you could put a cup of coffee on his helmet and you wouldn't spill a drop, the way he's running down the field with that speed and that balance. And so I've heard him described in a couple articles, Bo Jackson light, which I thought was pretty interesting. But this kid's a gamer, and the running back room, the shaping out of that is going to be hugely important to the success of this team. So whether it's Paul, whether it's Jordan James, whether it's a transfer, these are all things that I think certainly Duck fans should be keeping their eyes on, because I think that's the most important position in terms of what happens here with signing day.
Okay, that's an interesting point. I think that I'd say it's important. I don't know if I'd say it's the most important right now, and I'm going to tell you why, because of another comment that we got, another comment I should just say. This coming from Breezy, and he's saying Kristen Miller to the O. So let me switch up the highlights here so you guys can see who we're talking about and get a better understanding of kind of what we're looking at prospect wise. So let me just switch this over. Appreciate the patience. So Kristen Miller is a defensive lineman, huge, big time name that was out here in Eugene for a visit about 2 weeks ago, I believe. It was his official visit. And, he's a defensive lineman, one of the higher rated guys still left on the board. Just to kind of give some more background on who we're looking at here. 247 has him as the number 102 player in the nation, number 14 defensive lineman, and the number 9 prospect in Georgia, listed at 6'4", 294. And since we're talking about him, I think that he is actually, I'd say, more important than the running back spot. I know that the numbers are kind of thin and not the ideal situation for the Ducks, but I think that they're going to get that figured out probably a little bit more easily than they are the defensive line. You talked about Seven McGee. I think it's going to be interesting to see if he's more used as a receiver or a running back. But to Miller, I think that the Ducks have just been lacking on the defensive line in their recruiting department. I mean, that's no slight to the guys that are here. There's a lot of great players. You look at Popo Amavai, who's coming back. That's huge. I think Brandon Dorless has obviously been an awesome contributor, but a guy like Christian Miller is the one that you need to add to your class. And it's just, you see Dan Lanning get hired, and then what do you know? A guy from Georgia that's still on the market shows up for a visit. So that's not to say that they're going to get him, but that's the Dan Lanning factor. I feel like, I wouldn't be surprised if the two have met before the visit. He had a cool picture posted on his Twitter of him and Lanning during the visit. And I think he said something about along the lines of, this is P. You think about the slang that's kind of trending with recruits and the whole new song with Gunna talking about pushing P. I can't provide any context into what that means. I need to learn more about that, but that's beside the point, Steven. This is a big time dude. Ducks need help, man, on the defensive line with guys like KT heading to the NFL draft. And I think if you can get a guy like this, it'd be a heck of a start for Dan Lanning on the recruiting trail, because big time defensive linemen are not easy to come by.
100%. And, this kid's a game wrecker. That's what you're really looking for with interior linemen, is not somebody to just plug up a hole, but somebody to really disrupt the plays. And he's extremely explosive, super quick, great twitch interior in terms of, for somebody his size. Now, what I really hope Lanning's doing with this kid is, granted, he's about 50 pounds smaller than him, but I hope he's saying, hey, I was just coaching Jordan Davis for the last few years, and you should see what we did with that kid. This kid, to me, again, he's smaller, but that's sort of the first thing that I thought of when I was watching his highlights. I was like, "Ooh, this kid's like a smaller, younger brother Jordan Davis kind of feel." So I'm curious to see if you have that sort of same impression when you were watching some of his tape. But with the Lanning connection, I hope that that's what he's pitching to the kid, because that's who I would want to emulate if I was an interior lineman right now from the state of Georgia. Right. So you're right. Name wise, that would be the biggest land that the Ducks could get, arguably, for just individual names. So it would be huge.
Yeah. So we've ran through some guys, Florence, we talked about Andrew Paul in the running back position. Christian Miller's definitely got to be up there. I think the easiest way I can kind of sum this up is, I feel like we know how important it is to win in the trenches. We've seen the big time offensive linemen come to Oregon. We've seen the direct impact that they've had at Oregon. You look at Penei Sewell, you look at Ryan Walk, a variety. There's a number of guys you could point to. The Ducks have been winning in the trenches, but it's been more so on the offensive side of the ball than the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion.
Agreed.
And that's why you need to bring a guy like this to Eugene, and man, he'd be a huge add. It looks like you had a point you wanted to add.
No, I was just going to say, I totally agree that the Ducks overall have really been hitting it on the offensive line in terms of getting those dominant kind of guys. But and Oregon has done it on the edge. I think they've recruited great the last couple of years. KT obviously is the biggest name in terms of edge rushers. But yeah, those interior beasts are often overlooked in terms of their importance to the team, because they're the kind of guys where they don't need to make a tackle every play to have a huge impact on what goes on. If they just get themselves into the backfield on a regular basis and blow up the blocking assignments, it's going to open up. Can you imagine if the lanes that could open up with a guy like Noah Sewell behind him, or Justin Flo running into those lanes that he busts up with going at the centers and the guards? They've got to be salivating at the potential of getting a guy like this. So that's, I think, another aspect to this is the importance of those inside interior defensive linemen, is that they're off the hook a lot of the times in terms of making the actual play. They just need to blow it up, and this kid's a specialist at that.
Yeah, one last thing I want to add about Miller. to kind of just get people up to speed. We talked about how he got out here to Oregon. Last weekend, he took a visit out to Florida A&M, and they had some super cool photo shoots with him. I saw a picture of him. Maybe I can actually pull it up just because why waste time talking about it when I can just show you what it looks like. So give me a second to see if I can get that up on my end here. But just like I said, to get people up to speed, he did visit Florida A&M. So kind of tracking where a lot of these guys are spending some of those final official visits, right? As we head towards signing period here next week. Let me see. So let me get this up. Check this picture out. Look at how cool that is. I mean, there's no way that's a real snake, right? Like that's just straight up dangerous.
No chance.
But like that's just icy. Like I just like that picture a lot.
Famu coming in hot. Okay, Famu, I see you.
Yeah. So that's kind of just a cool update there. And then it looks like Mario Cristobal and Joe Salavea, they had a previous relationship, obviously, when they were recruiting him at Oregon. So you figure you're much closer, and Cristobal is obviously going to take a shot with guys like that. So he's pulling up to have that in-home visit. Maybe Miami has a good shot, but I say all of this, maybe Oregon is a real contender we see here, but at the end of the day, this is a guy from Georgia. Georgia just won the national championship. I mean, it's hard. As much as you want to pitch the relationships, Dan Lanning coming to Oregon, I think getting him on campus is obviously a win in itself. But there are some guys that are just from Georgia. They grow up rooting for Georgia, and there's no better time for them to hop in the boat with Kirby Smart, fresh off of a national championship. He can say, "This is my vision. I went out and executed it, and we just won a national championship, and we want you to be here and be a part of the next one." And at the end of the day, I mean, something like that, like a national championship, can just trump whatever you have to offer, if you're at a school that hasn't done it before, like Oregon, unfortunately.
Yeah, 100%. Excellent point there. Like that really should trump everything, right? If these kids, these kids are all super competitive, and national championship is the biggest stage you can ever get. It's the most eyes they're going to have on them probably in their entire career, unless they go on to do huge NFL things. But to this point, certainly. So yeah, that pitch to be able to be like, no, we don't just have dreams of being a national champion, because everybody does. Lanning's got a blueprint, one that worked. So I think that's a huge advantage that he has, especially again with recency. They just did it. You can be like, did you guys not see the game? Did you guys not see what we did to Alabama? Because that can be you. So I think that the kind of him saying, okay, look what I've done at Georgia. Now let's do that at Oregon, because it hasn't been done at Oregon yet. That's when you're combining those two things of, one, doing something special for the first time that recruits, I think, really, really resonate with, and two, saying that I've got the plan to legitimately make it happen. So jump on board, because I need you to be able to be a part of this. I think that's hugely important and impactful for these recruits. Real quick, I just want to mention that picture that you just had up. He makes Mario Cristobal look like a small man. Like he's just so big. Like the potential with this kid. So yeah, you know what? I gotta say, Max, the more you've been talking about it, I think you've swayed me in terms of the importance here.
Yeah, no, for real, man. So we'll see if the Ducks can ultimately get it done. The staff has been all over the country, since they hosted their last crop of recruits this past weekend, and maybe they made a stop in Georgia. Who knows? But one more guy I want to talk about. Actually, hold on, let's see, because I know we're coming up on an hour, and that's about what we were going for. But just kind of a quick sidebar, since we're talking about Georgia and their national championship, we've seen the heights that Mario Cristobal got Oregon to on the recruiting trail. But at the end of the day, he was just winning Pac-12 championships. What could this Oregon team do if they win a national championship recruiting? Like, there's all the hypotheticals, I'm sure all Oregon fans have heard, the O represents the same number of national championships you guys have. All you're doing is winning the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 has been horrible. That's not wrong. The Pac-12 is down. Like, that's why I'm excited about this Riley hire, to get one of those premier brands kind of back to relevancy, because it'll just make it bigger for Oregon to get a win over a program like USC. But what do you think about that, Stephen? With the recruiting and how it could go to an even higher level if the Ducks were to win a national championship?
It's interesting you brought that up, because I've actually thought about what that would do. And shoot, maybe I'm totally off here, but I think that if Oregon gets a national championship, that they could have a number one national class like for the next 2-3 years right after that, just like, you know, sort of put it down like with money. You know what I'm saying? Like Lanning, if Lanning can bring one to Oregon with everything that Oregon already has in terms of their recruiting ability, facilities, tradition, swag, all of those things are important to the kids, then a national championship is going to be just the ultimate kicker. That ring, wearing that ring and going into somebody's home and pitching them and just having that national championship ring sit on the table while you're talking to them, I think that speaks louder than anything they could really say. So that's, it's when thinking about winning a national championship, you try to, as a fan, just think about it as that year, right? Like that's your only goal for the year. We're trying to stay focused on that. And if you win, like, let's appreciate it, because back to back, unless you're Alabama, seems to be almost impossible. But I've been thinking about it in terms of the long game factor as well, and what that would do to open up doors in recruiting. And I feel sort of selfish thinking about it that way, but it's real, man. It's real. That I think is going to completely blow the top off of it.
Another interesting part with this whole equation, Stephen, with recruiting, there's so many new aspects that have kind of hopped into the equation. You have the transfer portal, you have NIL, and it's hard unless you're some of the higher ups to really kind of see how that's affecting things. I mean, you could look at I was on the phone with a coach today, and we were talking about Arizona, and between like processing people out, adding guys in the recruiting class, adding guys in the portal. He was talking about Arizona, and I think the numbers came out to about 40 new players. Like that is half your roster overhauled like that. I really like snapping like on the podcast. Like, I don't know if people have seen that have been watching for a while, but like, I really just feel like it helps me make my point. That's just kind of,
I love it, bro. I love it.
I think that's just kind of a little mannerism, I guess, that I've noticed lately. So hopefully people aren't getting too upset with me about that, but that's just what I was going to say is all that stuff is entering the equation. But at the end of the day, winning is the best recruiting tool. And that's another reason, like I was saying earlier with Florence and the USC-Oregon battle, Oregon's winning now. USC has not won in a while. That's not to say that they're not going to be a recruiting giant, because I think that they are. But, with the Kristen Miller conversation, I don't know. I think that obviously makes Georgia look that much more appealing. And then we also got another comment that I wanted to talk about before we talked about our last guy as we get up on an hour here. Breezy was asking again, thanks for the question. Any chance we flip Jordan James? I've noticed that we got him on campus and had a home visit today. Yes, they did. Carlos Laughlin, Oregon running back coach, hitting the road recruiting. I mean, if you saw this guy last week, I think he hit about half, maybe 3/4 of the schools in Florida, also made it out to Texas. Like, this dude has been everywhere, as have a lot of the Oregon coaches. But I think, getting in home here, like I said with Rashada earlier, like with Lanning, he was just here. And then you get the coaches in front of him again. I think that obviously clearly shows that Oregon is prioritizing him, on the recruiting trail. He's definitely feeling that love from the Oregon staff, getting in home, getting in front of the family, showing that you're willing to travel all across the country. And I say all that, Stephen, and, other programs are doing that, right? It's not like, oh, Oregon's the only one doing that. And that's what makes recruiting so interesting to follow. You see, it's kind of a level playing field, and, you'll see the programs that are really buying in. And clearly you can see from this Oregon staff that they're buying in early. I think that, getting him on campus obviously has the Ducks right there in contention. It kind of just comes back to how are things looking with Broussard, who is here visiting from the transfer, not from the transfer portal, but he's in the transfer portal. He's the Colorado transfer running back. Andrew Paul is hopefully going to get on campus. If you're a Duck fan, you got to hope to get him on campus. But it all kind of comes back to how does the staff want to manage those numbers, and how are they kind of ranking their options? That's something we just don't know right now.
Yeah. First off, I don't think the Oregon staff sleeps. Carlos Laughlin specifically, I don't think they've been sleeping at all, and I love that. They've been hitting the trail really hard, so I commend the staff for that. If somebody's taking a last minute visit, then you've got to just assume that they're in the mix. I don't think that you're going on these last visits if you don't really have a legitimate interest in potentially going there. So super encouraging. Back to, just something I said earlier, in my opinion, if this isn't the most important thing, then it's definitely 1B in terms of importance for the Ducks recruiting. And that's with the running back room, because right now, like Byron Cardwell obviously showed, tons of promise. And I think he's probably RB1 as of right now, like today. But that being said, what are we, running backs, they get dinged up all the time. I mean, we've got 2 or 3 scholarship running backs right now as of today. So, I think that you need to have at least one other big name in there, just because you got to assume somebody's going to get hurt. So I think that either getting James or getting Paul is extremely, extremely important. One of those 2 guys. But to be honest with you, 2 running backs, regardless of if it's one from prep, one from the portal, or both from prep, I think they need 2 running backs, Max. I really think they do.
All right. Well, that's what we got to see how things shake out there. The last guy that we want to talk about here, and then we'll get some kind of final thoughts. Steven, I know he was getting asked about in the chat earlier in the show. Marion Winston out of the Portland area. I think, obviously Duck fans will probably recognize this name with his brother Lamar Winston being a former Duck, and then Winston being a former commit himself, out of Central Catholic. Some of the updates that we kind of know about him, he was recently out in Gainesville, like Boardingham, who we were talking about earlier. He was out in Gainesville for a visit. But I was kind of wondering myself, is Oregon going to be prioritizing him on the recruiting trail with, kind of some of the numbers that we see and the needs on defense? It seems like he's kind of a tweener when it looks like between the linebacker and defensive line. I think he's ultimately probably going to end up being a guy that plays with his hand in the dirt. So maybe leaning more towards that defensive line role. But that question that I just posed, how much of a priority is he going to be? I think we got that answer when we saw Dan Lanning and Coach Don Johnson go in home with him for a visit this week. And I think with Oregon and kind of, some of the connections that we can draw here, Don Johnson was a former coach in the Portland area before he came to Oregon. So, he's plugged in out there and he's got great relationships out there. Getting Dan Lanning, the head coach of the program, to be, in home with him is obviously, a sign that there's that priority. And then, when you're also talking about how are their chances looking to get Winston back in the fold come signing day, he announces here today on Wednesday that he's going to be in Eugene for a visit this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think Lanning this is another one of those examples where Lanning's kind of success recently at Georgia has been really appealing to this kid. Reason I say that is just because he tweeted after Lanning won that game, dangerous man, Dan, it's quacking. So, you've got to, again, it's just another thing that has an impact on these recruits. I agree with his size. I think he's like 240 right now. So again, you have to assume that these guys are going to put on size as they get into a weight program at D1 level. So I think he is going to be somebody that plays with his hand in the ground, or at least is mostly coming off the edge if in a 2-point stance, but I don't think he's going to end up as a linebacker. But this would just be another, the staff is clearly trying to solidify itself as a defensive-minded program, and I love that. And this would be just another, piece of that puzzle, sort of solidifying that philosophy for Lanning and company.
And that's a great point, Steven. I think, as we think about some of the guys that the Ducks are still in on, particularly the 2022 class, you got to figure that they probably have a better shot with the defensive, players. But to that point, I think that signing day is going to be a great opportunity for these offensive coaches to say, hey, maybe we're looking like a defensive-minded program, because that might very well be what ends up happening with the way that, the staff was assembled and Lanning being a former DC. But I feel like about the offensive staff, I'm like, hey, we can make some noise ourselves over here. It's not just going to be about defense.
100%. Yeah. The balance on both sides of the ball is going to be what wins the Ducks championships, right? In terms of recruiting prowess, I think the defense is sort of got to lead the charge here, especially with Lanning. And that's what's going to be most attractive to these kids. When it comes down to it, I think what's going to bring a championship to Oregon is going to be the defense. Oregon's offense has been dominant in the past based off of the, if we're talking about the rest of the nation here, and it hasn't got it done. If we really want to compete with the big boys, I think this last national championship was like just a really great example of how a powerful defense, no matter how high profile the offense is, even if you have a Heisman winning quarterback under center or in shotgun, that if you have a quality defense with a bunch of dudes on it that are just dogs, then you can beat anybody in the country. So and you'll win a national title. And so I think that sort of emphasis and that kind of clearly proven method is what's going to be sort of Oregon's recruiting brand going forward. But that's just my early hypothesis.
Without a doubt. All right. Marion Winston, definitely a name to keep an eye on as he heads to Eugene for what's shaping up to be his final trip before National Signing Day next week. Stephen, as we kind of wind down here, we've hit on a ton of guys just in this episode alone, and it was an hour, and there's a bunch of other guys we could talk about too. We're going to have a visitor list story, maybe tomorrow, if not early Friday, but I'm hoping for tomorrow up on Ducks Digest. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But as we wind down, do you have any other thoughts just on recruiting, on Oregon football that maybe we didn't get to that you kind of wanted to make sure we put out there tonight?
No, I mean, overall, like you said, it was a really good discussion. We talked about a bunch of different guys. Really appreciate, the people who chimed in and talked about the guys that you guys wanted us to speak on. Really love interacting and engaging with you guys. But I'm so stoked for signing day. Like you said, I think there is going to be a splash or two for the Ducks, no pun intended. So it's going to be, it's just going to be really exciting to watch what happens here in the next week or so with visits and heading into signing day. And these final decisions that these kids make. It's something that obviously has a huge impact on the success of a program. So Lanning's first a program. Yes, you're right. I got to get into the habit of that.
We're a program now. Podcast. We are
yes, we're a program.
Dish, we are a program podcast, not a program podcast.
100%.
Please continue.
I apologize. We are a program podcast out here. So I just think that it's going to be really interesting to see what Lanning can do with his first class. And if he can, again, it just goes back to if he hasn't had an entire, recruiting season to be able to do this. So if he can have a really good class this year and then have success in year one on the field, I would be nervous if I was some other big programs in terms of the next couple of years in recruiting.
Yeah, it really feels like that momentum and that steam is kind of building up as we head into next week. There's a couple last quick notes that I wanted to touch on because I know we mentioned Rashada earlier, and he's a 2023 guy. He announced his top 10 in the fall, I think it was, or if it was maybe in December, but either way, it was recently, and Oregon landed there on the top 10. I think that the Ducks are obviously in a great spot after I talked to him. Again, another update you guys can read over on Ducks Digest for the full story, since we're probably not going to be able to get everything in this podcast. But I think the Ducks are in a great spot. I'd maybe even go as far as saying the driver's seat, as in like the leaders. He's a guy that wants to take his official visits right away. That's early in the spring, for these 2023 guys. He wants to take his visits and, kind of after that, commit. He wants to make that decision. So he really realizes that the quarterback can be the face of a class, and he wants to get to work at wherever he ends up going, building out that class. He talked really highly of Kenny Dillingham on his visit. He was talking about, that was one of my favorite parts of the visit, was just getting on that chalkboard and talking football with Kenny Dillingham. He told me they see really eye to eye, and that's obviously a big part of the success there. His family, the success, how well the visit went, I should say. His family was on the visit with him last weekend, and he, talked really highly about how Lanning, himself made the family feel really welcome. He talked about he wants to be able to compete for a national championship, and he wants to have a good situation to walk into. Just another cool connection that he has with Oregon is he's former teammates with Jay Butterfield, so another quarterback who can tell him what things are like at Oregon. So that's awesome. And so like I said, there's so many guys that we can talk about, but since I mentioned him earlier, I felt inclined to make sure I could give the viewers and the listeners just a little tidbit on kind of what we were hearing scoop wise.
Yeah, and just real quick on that, I think it's really huge that he took the time to mention, how much he enjoyed talking with Dillingham, because on the college level, I think certainly more than high school, and then I think more than professionally too, the relationship that they have with their position coaches is just so important to them, and that includes coordinators, especially if you're a quarterback. I mean, it's not a quarterback's coach, but let's be real. He's going to be spending most of his time with Dillingham and the offensive coordinator. So that's really huge, I think, in terms of what he's thinking, because if he's already connecting with the guy he's going to be spending the most time with, both in the film room and on the sidelines in practice and during games, then I think that's a really good sign for the Ducks. He clearly also, based on everything he said in terms of what he says he wants and he's looking for, I think it aligns with the vision that Lanning's trying to paint as a program here. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see what happens with this kid down the line as well. I think having Butterfield show him around was good, right? You can never underestimate these past relationships these kids have had with other guys on the football field and in different locker rooms. So I'm glad that he was able to hang out with him and sort of have him show him around. But I think the biggest thing, like you said, is a quarterback can really be the face of a class. And based on what I've seen of the kid so far, I think he's somebody who would be great to be the face of a future Oregon recruiting class.
And if you look at the quarterback position, Stephen, that's got to be the priority for Coach Lanning and his staff in 23. We talked about the importance of getting top tier corners and edge rusher. Edge rushers are so hard to come by, as we all know at this point. We saw the impact that Kayvon Thibodeau had here at Oregon. Now the attention kind of turns to getting a whole front seven loaded with guys like that kind of caliber. That's not necessarily realistic in just 1 year, but we've seen how much impact one class can have. And with Rashada, he's got to be a top target for the staff. There's a lot of really good quarterbacks out west in the 23 class. Another guy that comes to mind is Pierce Clarkson out of St. John Bosco out there in Bellflower, California, Southern California. And then another big name that's worth mentioning is Nico. Hopefully I don't butcher this. Nico Lamalevea or Lama Leava. Maybe that's how you say it. He's the quarterback at Warren High School in Downey. My guy John Garcia got to see him out in Battle Miami last week, and there's been reports that he is expected on campus this weekend as a big time visitor. So I'm still working to confirm that, but it's so important to get the quarterbacks and these big 23s on campus early, and then you can just hopefully get in a pattern of getting those guys back on campus and being a top destination. So those were kind of just some of the final remarks that I had. Stephen, was there anything else, or do we want to just get to kind of the typical wrap?
I think we're good, man.
All right, awesome. So before we get out of here, you guys, we want to ask Stephen where they can find more of you. Stephen, you wrote your first story for us, which was awesome. And you've also been doing some cool stuff with forums, so would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can check me out on SB Sports 541 on Twitter. Like Max said, I am pretty regularly posting on the Ducks Digest forums. And that's something where, honestly, guys, I would love to interact with you guys to get some ideas about what you want to talk about, right? There are plenty of things that I think are interesting to talk about when it comes to Oregon and football and, the program, things like that. I like to have, sort of fun and light topics as well. But really, it's not for me, it's for you guys. And so would love to get your interactions. If you post on a forum thread and, answer a question or something like that, feel free to say, you guys should talk about this in a future post or a future forum post. We really want to get your guys' interaction. Working on getting a YouTube channel set up. As I've mentioned before, I will let you guys know when that is up and running. But yeah, just really Twitter's the main way to get at me and see what I'm saying and thinking, and that's where I'll tweet my articles as well. Going to be having some new content out in the next few weeks, so just keep an eye out for that. And then yeah, guys, make sure you're tuning into Max's channels. Okay, that is actually how I got involved in all this, is being a fan of Max, and he's always got the scoop. Always got the scoop for you guys on all things Ducks, all things recruiting. So shoot him a follow on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Promise, guys, if you're looking for Duck, anything related to Ducks information and success of the programs, Max is the guy to go.
I appreciate the kind words, Stephen. Yeah, so definitely go ahead and make sure you guys lock in with Stephen on the social media platforms. Here's an example of what our forums look like. Really cool layout. You obviously got all the topics here that Steven and myself have been and other members of the forum of the message boards have been posting. So it's really fun to hop in there and have that direct interaction with you guys. See what's on your mind, like we talked about. And then I've also been using it to drop some recruiting nuggets, which is kind of cool to do. Not everything is going to be a story. But talked about how the Oregon staff was out in Alabama today to visit 2022 offensive tackle Inez Cooper. So that's really big because, like we talked about, they could always use some help on the offensive line. So sometimes I'll drop little tidbits of recruiting nuggets. I had my Arless Boardingham update last week, where he told me that he might not make it out to Oregon last weekend, which ultimately was the case. So definitely go check those out, guys. It's free to sign up, and I'm really working on building the community at Ducks Digest over there. And then just to kind of give you a final rundown of where you can find more of me, you can find me on Twitter at Twitter right here at mtorresports. And you can always shoot me a DM or tweet at me. Obviously, want to see what you guys are talking about, what's on your minds as Duck fans, and story ideas too. So it's always cool to connect with you guys over there, trying to build the following. And then if you're watching on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, make sure you go ahead and take a second out of your day to subscribe to the channel. It's free and it was really easy to do, and it's a tremendous help for me and what we're doing here covering the Ducks. And then last but not least, you can lock in with Ducks Digest on all the other social media platforms. We're at Ducks Digest on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So go ahead and make sure you guys check us out over there, and then follow some of our other writers on the Ducks Digest team. You got Steven at SB Sports 541, and then you got Dylan Rubin King, who's a regular on this channel, Nick Batty, John Rustick, Graham Metzger, and Billy Spots. Those last two have been doing a lot of hoops coverage for us, with that being in season right now. But that is all we have for this one, you guys. Thank you so much for the support that you've shown the channel, the podcast, all of our content at Ducks Digest. Really, really appreciate it. It's a blast getting to do this for a living. That's just the God honest truth. I'm really grateful to be able to do this, and it's been awesome connecting with you guys. So thank you so much. Big thanks to Steven for hopping on the show, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Take care.